We need a free enterprise economy, and we don't have it. We have a mixed economy. This mixed economy has been developing for really 80 years, since the depth of the Great Depression in 1933. So it's really exactly 80 years that the federal government has been tinkering with the economy. Now, the economy has grown since then. There's a lot more wealth in the economy. The standard of living is a lot higher, but we go through these periodic spasms known as depressions, recessions, because of the Federal Reserve's manipulating of interest rates. And so what we need to do is get the Federal Reserve out of the way, let interest rates reach market levels. We need the federal government to reduce the size of its budget. We need to reduce the regulatory burden on American business. We need to reduce our military presence around the world, which is draining resources from the American people. So it's pretty simple to figure out what needs to be done. Free enterprise works, free markets work. Government can't manage the economy. Lower tax rates, lower capital gains tax, get rid of the estate tax. These are things that hinder job creation, hinder capital formation. And so if the government got out of the way, it would free up resources that people could use in confidence that the government's not going to switch gears 2, 3, 5 years down the road and raise taxes on them. One of the problems we have in our economy is that business people, when they're planning a long-term project, what rate of taxation do they plug into their calculation to determine what their net profits will be 3, 5, 10 years down the road? What will their health costs be down the road? Because with this Obamacare, we're going to see an increase in health care costs, according to the latest reports that are coming out, that insurance companies are raising rates because of the impact of Obamacare on the health insurance market. Well, if you have more than 50 employees, you have to provide health care. If you don't, you have to pay a tax. And so what employers may do is to pay the tax and reduce their health care costs and tell employees, you have to go find your own health care. And the problem is, the reason we have health care tied to to employment is because of World War II, when we had wage price controls and employers offered an incentive to hire, to get people to work for them by offering medical insurance, which of course was not the appropriate way to do things, because we pay for our own life insurance, we pay for our own automobile insurance, we pay for our own property and casualty insurance. We don't need the employer to do that for us. And so here's another example of a government intervention in the economy that has these long-term effects, these unintended consequences, which are going to wreak havoc in the healthcare market, havoc in the ability of people to get affordable health insurance. And so, again, the evidence is overwhelming that if we free up the economy, free up the health insurance market, prices will come down, premiums will come down, and we just need to get the government to realize that, unfortunately, their philosophy in Washington is that they can run our lives, they can manage our lives, they can control our lives, they can tax away a good portion of our income, they can control our property, and this is what's hurting the U.S. economy. The deficit has been building for decades. The deficit is a result of President Bush's desire to invade Afghanistan and Iraq when there was no clear and present danger. I think that's the key operative term. There was no clear and present danger. And so he borrowed literally $4 trillion to fight these wars, rather than going to the American people and saying, hey, we think there's a threat, we're going to have to tax you in order to make sure that you're safe. I don't know if the American people would have bought into that, because now we know, and we knew years ago, that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that were threatening us. I mean, he may have had some things that were not very good for his neighbors, but that wasn't a concern of ours. Clearly, we want peace everywhere in the world, because peace, you get commerce, commerce, you get prosperity, prosperity, you get higher living standards. So when government officials say there's an imminent threat to us from a country that is one of the poorest on earth, except for the oil that they have, that's a disingenuous argument to make the American people. So the deficit has been building for decades because of war, entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, farm subsidies, corporate welfare. All these programs cost money, and if the government doesn't pay for them through taxation, then they're going to borrow money, and that's what they've been borrowing for the last 6 years. They've been borrowing, what, $8 trillion the last 6 years, and look at the outcome. Unemployment, according to some calculations, are as high as 16 to 20% because of all these discouraged workers and all the workers that are working part-time who would like to work full-time. So again, It's the welfare warfare state that's got us to this place in time in 2013. Massive spending, massive manipulation of interest rates and try to create good outcomes, and the result has been, according to Professor Kotlikoff in Boston, $220 trillion of unfunded liabilities. That means that's how much money we need today to pay for all the benefits of Social Security, Medicare over the next 75 years. Money the government clearly doesn't have because it's more than 10 times the GDP of the United States. Whenever a nation goes on a spending binge like we have and you don't pay for it, you're going to create the potential for massive inflation because the Fed has been helping the federal government by buying up all this debt the last few years. That means they've been creating money out of thin air to buy the Treasury bonds. And so this could have consequences down the road where we may see prices jump dramatically, much more so than we've ever seen in our history. Taxes are going up, property taxes are still going up, Social Security taxes went back up. Some upper income Americans are paying higher tax rates because of the so-called budget deal that took place last year. So taxes are a big portion of people's income, and that's been going away through the federal and state and local taxes. So we have a situation where the government is a big expense for the American people, and the question we have to ask ourselves, what are we getting for all these taxes? And I think the answer is not much. Well, the good news is that we have a lot of things that our parents didn't have. We have cell phones. We have these great little cameras that are videotaping us today that are incredibly high quality. We have much better food, clothing, a lot better medical care in many instances where we're able to diagnose illnesses pretty easily. But things are very expensive today. I mean, the cost of sending a kid to college today is very expensive for the average family compared to when I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s. And so things have gotten a lot more expensive. And so the theme of the documentary that I'm working on with my students is whatever happened to penny candy, what happened to the nickel hot dog, what happened to the 3-cent stamp. All these things are pretty standard items that have gone up in price tremendously because of the constant money printing by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve buys government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, and that becomes, and the people who sell that to the Federal Reserve take those checks and deposit them into their checking account at commercial banks, and so the reserves go up at the banks. The banks have now more money to lend, but they've been sitting on that money as reserves at the Federal Reserve rather than lending it out. So if they loaned all that money out, prices would go up because this money would ripple through the economy, bidding up the prices of goods and services. So in one way, the Federal Reserve has the best of both worlds. They depress interest rates, which tries to stimulate the economy. The banks don't lend out as much as they otherwise would, which dampens inflationary fires in the economy. And so it looks like the Fed is doing the right thing, but the Fed is not doing the right thing because most people on Wall Street, on these financial news shows think the Fed is doing a great job because interest rates are low, but they're low because the Fed is manipulating them low. They're not free market interest rates. If we had free market interest rates, rates would be around 4% instead of 0 on the short end, and they'd be a little bit higher maybe on the long end. But this doesn't end well. Through the last 100 years of the Federal Reserve, since it was established in 1913, we've had bubbles. We had the bubbles in the 20s with real estate and the stock market. We had bubbles in the 60s and 70s. We had bubbles in the 80s and 90s, and the bubbles in the 2000s. So we constantly have bubbles because the Fed tries to stimulate the economy through quantitative easing, which is just a fancy name of saying they're creating money out of thin air. If we create money, we go to jail. They create money, they're considered heroes.